Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on the future of e-commerce in Latin America. My name is Abel Delgado. I am the Digital Marketing Director for Payments and Commerce Market Intelligence, and I'm going to be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. So before we get started, we just want to give you a quick overview of what to expect in terms of this particular webinar. We're going to have about 50 minutes of presentation or so, and then about 10 minutes set aside for questions. You can ask questions at any point in time in the webinar. The way to do it is if you look at your user panel, you're going to see a couple of icons, and one of them is going to say Q&A. You click on that one, it will bring up a window. You type in your question, hit send, and we will receive your question and be able to address as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. So at any point in time, as you're seeing a bit of data or an analysis or an insight that we're sharing, and that sparks a question, by all means, fire away, and we'll try to address that question as soon as we can at the end of the webinar itself. One question that we always get in all of our webinars is, will the materials be available after the webinar? So let me answer that one in advance and say absolutely. What we usually do is take about 24 hours to 48 hours to edit the actual video, and then we send folks the presentation itself as that you're going to be seeing here today, as well as the video recording, a link to it so you can watch it. So absolutely, those materials will be shared. All right, let's move on to our next part of our presentation, which is the legal notice. Let's take a look at that over here. So I'm not going to read this line for line because it's going to take up too much time, but the gist of it is that we've tried to verify the information as much as possible, but we're not going to be responsible for any commercial loss due to business decisions made with this information, et cetera, et cetera. So we encourage you to read that when you have time because that is an important bit of information there. Now, this brings us to us. So as a company, we're the ones that put together the information that you're going to be seeing here today, and we're actually sharing stuff that came from our particular research, so it's original research. Now, as a company, we were actually are old, but we're also new. We're new in the sense that we started in 2022, but we're a affiliate of America's Market Intelligence, which has been around for 30 years. So America's Market Intelligence had a payments practice, and for the good amount of time has been conducting hundreds of studies in Latin America on payments. And what we decided to do in launching PCMI is expand our scope of or focus, as you will, to international destinations, to cover more than Latin America and cover global markets. So that's really what our focus is at this point, and what we're doing now. And this e-commerce data is part of that. And we've launched it now for Latin America, but of course, we're going to be doing it for other countries as well. So stay tuned for those developments. So currently, because of this international focus, we have teams that are working in cities all over the globe. Here's a quick list of some of them. You can see, Dubai, Cape Town, New Delhi, Jakarta. There's a lot of different places that we're at, and we can produce all sorts of studies, not just on e-commerce, but on specific payments topics for each of these markets. So if for some reason somebody in your company has a need for that, that's something for you to take into account, because we can help you with competitive intelligence, opportunity benchmarking, any number of different market research studies within the space of payments to help you and your company achieve your goals and make decisions. All right, moving on now to our speakers. So I'm going to be turning over the floor to them in a bit, but who basically they are is we have Andreas Farge, who actually led the team that developed all this data that we're going to be sharing today about the future of e-commerce in Latin America. And then we also have one of our directors on hand, Cesar Borali, who is based in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So I'm going to turn the floor over now to the speakers so we can begin. And we're going to start off with Andreas. Andreas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abel, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. Thank you guys for joining. This was a very fun process of putting together. And so this report, everything that you'll be hearing today is based off of our e-commerce data library, which we have available in two different forms. So we have the raw data, which really drills down into 15 markets in Latin America with data from at least 2020 to 2026. For some markets, we actually go back to 2016 as well. And that's available in a very easy to use pivot table style Excel, as well as on the left hand, you'll guys see the extended report, which includes what you guys will see today, but really diving deeper with country level segmentations of e-commerce and predictions. So if we can go on to the next slide, you'll see that this report is not like the other e-commerce reports that are already out there, which we have our awesome team and interview directly. So about 50 experts in the region, as well as cross that data with real transactional volumes that we get from central banks and certain partners, and use our historical data library to triangulate and figure out just how the market is moving. And something else that's just unique about our data set is that it's hyper customizable. So we will work with you to answer the specific questions that you guys need, and then give you these reports that are don't have any licensing issues. So you are free to share them within your company once you make that purchase. So if we continue, I'm happy to pass the floor on, or actually, let's start with our 5 takeaways, and you can go ahead and show them all on the screen, Abel, which are going to guide our presentation today. So throughout this presentation, we will be diving into how these predictions unfold and getting you that backing. But our takeaways are that product use case match is the game. The customer experience has become everything. And when I say experience, I really mean experience, everything around that. Going through platforms, going next to platforms, marketplaces that have really augmented their offerings, it's driving this easy user experience and will continue to shape e-commerce in the region. Now, Brazil, this mega market, is still giant, but growth is stabilizing, especially compared to Mexico and Peru, where it's really ramping up, and there's this opportunity as the population is finally, slowly but surely digitizing. Next, we have cross-border, which is one of the biggest opportunities that we see, and I'm looking forward to Caesar's inputs on this later on. And finally, growth depends more on infrastructure than payments. So data and hyper-personalization will be the name of the game. So with that, I'm happy to pass the mic on to Caesar to kick us off and give us an overview of the state of digitization and e-commerce in LatAm.
Thank you, Andreas. So I think moving up to the next slide. This is kind of like I think good overview of the growth of the e-commerce market in the region, and also the effect of the pandemic. So we did see an explosive growth coming from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic. Growth has been normalized since then, but it is still one of the regions that are growing more quickly with regards to e-commerce, not only from a volume perspective, but from a number of transaction perspective as well. So we have seen, I think worth to mention here, that in the past, with regards to e-commerce, we would see a big difference between the more developed nations and the emerging markets, and especially because of technology like language and even payment methods and payment functionalities. But we have seen, especially for the past 3 to 5 years, the region catching up with some of the most advanced methodologies and features that the e-commerces offer worldwide. So next slide. So this is a little bit of the breakdown that we had. I think, Andreas, for the first time this year, I guess, but the volume broke down by verticals, and this is something very unique about this report that we offer. So we do see still a big percentage of the volume coming from retail, and that includes marketplaces, direct-to-consumer websites, all types of physical goods, e-commerce platforms. But we also see a strong growth coming from other sectors as well. So we have mapped here other as everything, including SaaS platforms, tax payments, fees and license, mobile top-ups, healthcare, insurance, gambling. So some of the more like newer segments as SaaS, but also traditional companies and segments investing more on mobile platforms, on e-commerce and direct to consumer experiences as well. So this is I think a little bit of on the breakdown. Very strong verticals is still growing. Gaming, streaming, segments that were born digitally already, but we are seeing kind of like strong growth across all those different verticals. Next one, please. So this is kind of where we are with regards to the e-commerce volume compared to other regions. So excluding Africa, Latin America is still the smallest region compared to other markets, but it is growing faster and higher than any other region. So if you see from 2022 to 2023, the region has grown 30%, and the other markets, more mature markets, have been growing around 10 to 15%. The future growth is also forecast to be higher than any other region. An interesting data point here is that the current the e-commerce, the annual e-commerce spend per capita in the region, it's currently at $467. But if we look back, the same data point in 2019, that value was $219. So if we're talking about like 4 years, that's 3 to 4 years, that's an impressive growth as well. And the last one I wanted to talk through here is basically the internet, the access to internet, which we have seen the region as probably the foundation base for everything we have seen from innovation perspective. A lot of the fintechs and payment companies have grown backed by the internet access of the population. A lot of the ride-hailing apps are very successful in the region, and that's one of the I would say infrastructure plays that will facilitate that growth. So we foresee that 33 million consumers will have access to the internet for the first time in Latin America between now and 2026. If we see that across different markets, for some markets like Brazil, we see a 1% increase. We consider the market already more mature than other ones like Argentina, but the 1% of Brazil, it is 5 million people more. The same way we see like Mexico and Peru, which we see as markets where you have more opportunities for growth. Mexico increasing 7% means that 12 million people will have access to internet. So across the region, like 33, it's a big market, and a lot of people that will have access to internet and will be able to access different products and different services as well.
And one thing to note here that this is only considering the top 7 markets. So there's more opportunities out there. If we can go to the next slide, we're going to focus again on these largest 7 markets and look at another data point that gives us some interesting basis for the next analysis. So here, I really like this slide because we can segment at least these 7 countries into 3 different modes of growth and trajectories. So we have first, we're looking at online shoppers, so the percent of people who are shopping online in the past 12 months, and then financial account holders, I think is a better term than users. As you see, these numbers are quite high in these markets. So access point to a financial institution and shopping online. When we look at compare these 2 numbers, we see that financial account penetration in these top markets is higher than online shoppers. They have developed in the more traditional sense. And now what will move the needle is value-added services and convenience. And so multi-rail products become crucial because we really do believe and are hearing on the ground that what is making a difference is actually serving beyond the basic necessities that most people have already have access to. Now we go to Ecuador, where there was this massive jump in internet penetration, like we saw on the slide before, and some laws pushing the needle forward and making financial account access that much easier and free and digitally available. So we saw this jump to 87% penetration, which is quite high, compared to online shoppers, which is lagging. So that's why we're categorizing this market as access fuels growth. And lastly, these two gemstones of economies that digitization is going to fuel growth because they are so cash-based. So here, actually, financial account penetration is below online shopping. There are more online shoppers because of the awesome efforts of merchants operating in these markets to accept cash as a form of payment. Like in Mexico, that represents about 10% of volume and will continue to do so for the next 3 years. And so if we continue to the next slide, we're actually going to track this e-commerce penetration of adults, of online shoppers, versus the penetration of e-commerce over GDP. And we can see this nice grouping of markets and how we believe that they're moving. But the simplest takeaway here, and the point that I want to really drive across, is that markets that are in the top right corner, they already have a higher penetration of e-commerce over GDP and a higher penetration of adult shopping. So those are more competitive and more saturated. Now, if we go to the left side of this chart, we see an opportunity to increase share of wallet spend of someone's expenditure. And especially in the bottom right corner, we can increase the penetration within the market through access and other incentives. And so thank you. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We're actually going to see here some breakdowns by market, and you can right away see that the scale is insanely tipping towards Brazil and this massive economy. But the highest growing markets are actually Peru, Mexico, and Paraguay. So Mexico already being this giant opportunity will continue to be such. And going on to the next slide, we're actually going to get into the channels that are most relevant, and the mobile channel is truly dominating here, especially as mobile phones become more accessible, cheaper, and really just the user experience becomes better through the mobile channel. We're going to see that volume really ramping up compared to desktop purchases, which currently have a strong share in verticals like travel, where you're making a purchase of a larger ticket item and want to really be able to compare deals on a larger screen. But as mobile phones are way more accessible and widespread, we really continue seeing this trend move forward. Further, the abilities of digital wallets to be integrated on the mobile channel, especially as Apple Pay and Google Pay are penetrating the region. And I want to highlight that Google Pay has so much potential because they have a 80+% market share, which we'll see later on in the presentation. But that just makes the mobile channel that much more relevant, especially that our theme for the day is convenience. Our theme for the next few years is convenience in terms of what's guiding consumer preferences and choices. Awesome. So now we'll go on to our next section about multi-rail convenience, my favorite word. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to see a payment method breakdown of the region. And one thing to note right off the bat is that Pix in Brazil already represents 16% of payment methods throughout the whole region. That speaks to the size of the Brazilian economy, which Cesar will be going going into in a moment. But at the same time, cards are still ruling. Cards are still king. Credit cards, particularly, are 48%. And our predictions here, looking towards the future, is that it will drop towards 44% in the next 3 years, but debit cards will gain share. So there is this battle between the infamous A to A account-based and real-time payments and cards who are holding their ground but losing share. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, actually, so before passing the mic over to Caesar, I do want to remind you guys that all of this data is based off of our e-commerce data library, which is available in 2 formats, where in one, we go through this report, but in much more detail, going to a country by country breakdown level of the different segmentations we'll be talking about today, as well as some further interesting conversation and a 1-hour consultation with our team, as well as the raw data that has these segmentations that you see from at least 2020 to 2026 for every market. And we have some additional data thrown in there, like e-commerce penetration of adults and financial account penetration. Caesar, all for you.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. So just to, I think to exemplify what you said about Pix. So this is a comparison between Pix P2M, which stands for person to merchant, both for online and offline. And what would be the comparison with a debit and credit card over the past years? So we have seen, right after the pandemic, we have seen a strong growth for all the payment methods. And that's where Pix was born as well. But the growth that we have seen for Pix, it has been very strong, and it actually surpassed the debit card volume during the first quarter of this year. So there are, I think, a number of reasons for that to happen. We're going to explore in more details, but we have seen a very, very strong growth for Pix. I think the first comparison would be with debit card for both online and offline, but we also see Pix creating the rail and the foundations for other innovations as well. So we foresee that the growth will keep going within the next years. Next, please. So this is the kind of like from an e-commerce perspective, the breakdown for payment methods and how that changed across the years. So we are currently with wallets being 8% of the e-commerce volume, Pix being 27%. For the ones that are more familiar with the payment methods in Brazil, you might still remember Boleto, which is still around, but I think especially with regards to e-commerce, I think that was probably the first victim for Pix. Pix has replaced in most of the largest merchants and websites. It has replaced Boleto as a payment method. It gives instant access to cash to merchants. There is a lower processing fee. There is no chargeback. So there are a number of reasons why Pix has been very successful within the e-commerce space. I think another one that it's mentioned here, which it's worth to mention, is the open finance, and that in conjunction with Pix creates the foundation for a better user experience within the e-commerce. So with what we call the initiator role, companies can give a better user experience within their checkout, with users selecting any of their bank accounts to make a Pix payment. So we foresee that strong moment for Pix will keep going for the coming years. Next one. And this is kind of putting in comparison and putting in perspective Brazil against some other markets in the region. So we see a similar pattern in Colombia, which is very strong with Botón de Pago, PSE, and it has been strong for quite some time, even before Pix. But just taking into account that as of today, it's still those are very different experiences, right? Those are two account-to-account payment methods. Those are very relevant to e-commerce players in both markets. But the product itself, it is very different. The PSE, it's still very different than Pix. The Colombia Central Bank has in the agenda some develops and launches that will eventually improve the PSE experience. But as you can see here, there is a strong moment across the region for account-to-account payments. Next one.
Awesome. So now diving into these wallets as promised earlier, here we're calling out 3 generations of wallets in the region. So the previous generation was really so exemplified here by PayPal, enables card and bank transfers, at least in Mexico, and only cards in Brazil, and is going to continue to dominate in smaller economies as a digital wallet because of its notoriety for security. When we go to the next generation, which is really what's happening now, it's Mercado Pago that is driving all of these value-added services and convenient aspects. So you are able to reap multiple rewards at once, including some loyalty stuff. But really, you have also access to Mercado Crédito, which we're seeing being really successful in economies like Brazil and Mexico. And then we have this integration into the actual smartphone itself. So the rise of Apple Pay, and if we look towards the US and what's happening here with the credit that Apple Pay is offering, it is poised for growth, even though it has a lesser penetration of the market. And here the slide clarifies that 84% is Android. So as Google Pay and Apple Pay are expanding the market in these markets, we do expect that share to go up. And these oftentimes are a pass-through for cards. So that's important to keep in mind. If we continue, we'll be moving on to the next section of marketplaces and platforms. And going to the next slide, we're going to see here that retail is the most dominant vertical, driven by purchases like electronics, home appliances, fashion, beauty and cosmetics. That I really like looking at this electronics sub vertical, because what's fueling its growth is actually the further penetration of installments and other forms of credit that finance and enable the local consumer to make these types of purchases beyond just the elite, the elite and the credit card holders, which represent a smaller share of the population. So retail, as here we see in the title, it is the digital hook for those that do not shop online, and marketplaces are best exemplifying this, really offering full solutions to incentivize people to take a bite to the and get hooked. When we move to the next slide, we're going to dive into food retail, which, when looking at the economies as a whole, represent between 1/3 and 2/3 of total retail volume. And in the smaller economies, food retail is actually food in general is actually driving e-commerce growth. And that will have spillover effects into ride hailing and delivery category. But at the end of the day, that remains essential and is being driven by even incumbent retail institutions that are transforming their services and digitizing their services to better serve their clients and are reaping the rewards of doing so. And we see that in the big economies like Chile and Mexico, but that really it has that much more of an impact in the smaller economies like the DR, Jamaica, and Jamaica. So going to the next slide, we're going to go to my favorite slide of the whole presentation. And so it's a little dense, but here we really see the Mexican example of these retail groups creating massive ecosystems, which are further penetrating and finally capturing the lower socioeconomic levels and including them into this digital world. So if we start in the third row, we see accounts. So these financial accounts, I'm going to start here as a reference point, enable a user to hold a balance or access financial services, better said. And so Bas Super App, Cashi, Spin, Mercado Pago, Coppel Pay is the starting point of this journey and deep and more intimate relationship that is being built by these ecosystems with the user. To further that relationship, then we go up one and we go towards loyalty. And each of these have a program that gives rewards to their loyal customers, incentivizing more purchases in the ecosystem and further growing the ecosystem. And just at a more basic level, they're supplying actually the internet and connectivity services that enable the entire transaction and entire experience, entire flow, entire relationship. So all here but Mercado Libre have a connectivity solution, which is it's quite incredible, especially when we're looking at like Bait from Walmart, which increased in terms of in millions of users in just a few years. So there is demand, and that's what's causing this this prediction of such an increase in terms of internet penetration. Going back to the account row, we're actually going to go down one to the fourth and going to market. And so here we mean really sales, enabling merchants or enabling themselves, enabling a shop, enabling themselves, enabling merchants to have a capability to sell. So within the Bash Super App, within Walmart.com.mx, with this maker by NetPay, which was acquired by FEMSA, Mercado Libre platform, Coppel. These websites are platforms on which these retailers can move goods and SMEs can move goods. So SMEs now become this this opportunity and this other target that these ecosystems are really serving. And going down, we'll see just how. So acceptance and credit. Here, this slide is actually missing Baz Super App as an acceptance solution because it is one, and it's actually a fascinating one that has this really provocative feature, which has allowed it to grow to 12 million users within a year, that you can make a purchase at a merchant that's just standing near you using NFC. Granted, both have to have a smartphone that's enabled for this, but as this increases, especially with the proliferation of Chinese phones into the market, we're going to see this become more relevant. And then we look at these other solutions like Cashi and this plethora of solutions from Bensa that was really a NetPay, this acquisition, and all the way to Coppel Pay. Credit is the key, or has been the key, to unlock and finally move the needle in the market, slowly but surely. Next, serving the merchant, we have just the logistics solutions of figuring out that piece of the puzzle and making the lives of their SME clients that much easier, and the data that's going to optimize that and potentiate the SME. So that's why that's my favorite side. It really tells a full story of what's happening in Mexico and what could happen in these smaller economies that are really ripe for the taking. If we move on, we're going to go to the cross-border opportunity. So I'm happy to pass the mic over to Cesar.
Cool. Thank you, Andres. It is indeed a very interesting slide. The previous one, it is. Cool. So just going to cross-border, we see here a comparison between domestic and cross-border volume. We consider here cross-border volume as the companies operating with cross-border PSPs in the region. So we're going to get into the details of a few examples and names of cross-border PSPs. But the idea here is to compare how the domestic e-commerce volume compared to the cross-border volume. So we see that today it stands at 14% of the cross-border. It stands as 14% of the total volume, and that should go up to 15% by 2025, meaning that the cross-border, although it's a smaller base, but should grow faster than domestic, right? And this is driven for a number of reasons. I think just to point out a few here, we have seen new markets being selected for global merchants. So, in addition to Brazil and Mexico companies are trying to expand into the region in Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia. So we have seen global companies trying to operate and trying to increase their presence in the region. And also we see different verticals and business opportunities growing in the region. So betting, cryptocurrency, those are like segments that they brought a lot of volume to the cross-border PSPs within the last years. So we have seen a market that continues to grow and continues to innovate through new markets, through expansion, but also through new verticals. Next one, please. Some of the enablers here, we see that it is still an increasing market. You have local players, you have regional players, you have global players. So a lot of different cross-border PSPs, either the cross-border PSP, either like orchestrators, but we see a lot of new players coming into the market, exploring the existing and new verticals, as I just said, but also exploring new use cases as well. So all of those global and regional companies have been focusing a lot on payouts as well. So very strong use cases from like content creators, marketplaces, gig economy as well. So we have seen a very, very strong growth with regards to payouts. And as I said, like new verticals, betting, cryptocurrency, and also expansion markets.
Awesome. So here we'll be moving towards wrapping up our session and looking at the technology, first the technology driving the future of e-commerce, and then hitting it home again, circling back to our takeaways. So Cesar, on to you.
Yeah, perfect. So we just named like a few trends here. So a big buzz on AI these days. We do see that as something that will grow very fast globally and in the region as well. But with regards to e-commerce right now, we have seen a lot of newcomers trying to offer intermediate solutions as an intermediary between ChatGPT, Bard, and clients. So we haven't seen a very strong use cases within e-commerce yet for AI, other than those intermediaries that try to improve the experience for e-commerce. For example, trying to onboard new sellers, performing credit on existing sellers. But we do foresee AI growing very, very fast within the next years. Next one. So data management and personalization, that is a trend that I think has been around for quite some time. It is getting a lot of traction. It is something that AI definitely can boost in the region. So understanding more like how the customers go, through an e-commerce platform, what are the patterns, what are the habits, navigation, all those things, how they can better position a product to a consumer at the right time through the right channel. So those are all very relevant trends we see in the region. Next. With regards to payment, we do see, I think we talk a lot about that today, but we do see a very strong growth for account-to-account payments. That also helps the region to grow as the region becomes better from a financial inclusion perspective. That's a natural path that will keep growing. So account-to-account payments, the evolution of the RTP schemes in the region will also boost account-to-account. As I said, PIX and the other RTP schemes will actually serve as the foundation for innovation. So new products such as buy now, pay later, or other functionalities involving credit and the RTP. It is something that we foresee very strongly for the coming years.
Awesome. So going now to the takeaways, we're going back to where we started and looking at, I'm just going to reiterate these and really highlight their importance. So product use case match is going to be extremely important, especially as we see that convenience and really serving the customer and optimizing the customer experience is key. Platforms and their awesome ecosystems that are being created serve as the blueprint to move forward and penetrate the markets that have been unpenetrable. We see that growth in Brazil is stabilizing, but any marginal growth that we do see in Brazil is still a significant volume. And the largest growth opportunities that we predict are going to be Mexico and Peru, which are finally transitioning from these cash-based economies to at least being digitally friendly. Cross-border is one of the fastest opportunities that we identify, and will continue to be so. And finally, the infrastructure and data optimization, hyper-personalization is going to lend itself to the best user experience and will drive future growth. So with that, I'll wrap up by reminding you all that this presentation is based off of our e-commerce data library, which is presented in a deeper, more detailed and richer form of this presentation, which is a hyper customizable to answer whatever questions you specifically need. And the raw data, which really is a very simple to use Excel pivot table style to select what you want to look at and look at the exact segmentation that you're looking for. So with that, we will move on to the Q&A.
All right. Yes, that brings us to our questions, indeed, Andres. So let's take a look at a couple of them. First, we have one from Gonzalo here, and he's asking if we see cross-border e-commerce growing within the region in the next few years. And I think we kind of addressed that to an extent. And he wanted to know if we had data on that. So if we could readdress that point, I think that will be very helpful.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we foresee cross-border growing faster than domestic. We do have data on specific countries, verticals, even use cases between pay in, pay out, payment methods, verticals. So we do, I think, especially for cross-border, right, Andres, we do have a lot of data.
Totally.
All righty. So we have another question here from Diego, who wants us to expand a little bit on split payments.
Great. Yes. So split payments, especially the first thing that comes to mind is actually a very interesting use case in Paraguay. This very innovative fintech that is actually gaining traction within the market thanks to features like split payments. So that's really what the first thing that comes to mind. And we see other examples, especially in the larger economies. But this, I think, continues on towards the trend of towards convenience, and users are going to be attracted like moths to a light towards platforms that offer this solution towards whatever they need. And when I don't know if you guys have ever been at a restaurant and just have had awkwardly looked at each other about like, or at least to the waitress or waiter of putting all your cards down or whatever the local solution might be, of actually splitting that is a headache to this day. So platforms that can address that headache, I think, will continue to gain traction as they have in the smallest of economies that we're looking at here in Paraguay.
All right, thanks. So we have oh, I'm sorry, Cesar, did you have something to
just
say?
a quick comment on split payments. I think from an infrastructure perspective, it is something stronger in some markets and weaker in others. But split payments, I think, have been grown a lot, especially with marketplaces, right? So a marketplace that receive a payment, it has to split that payment within their own fee. It has to split with one seller. Sometimes you have a shopping cart where you have multiple sellers, so you have to split one payment among different sellers. Then you have like domestic sellers, you have cross-border sellers. So there's a lot of complexity around split payments. I think you have a lot of PSPs becoming specialized in that type of product and solutions. But it is something that I think has grown very fast since we have seen like thousands of use cases in marketplaces and platforms in the market. So it is something very, very present.
All right, thank you. So we have a simpler question, and we have a couple more complex ones, but let's take care of one of the simple ones here. This is from an anonymous attendee that's asking us if we have information on all 15 or how many countries we have information on. I believe the total is 15. That now rattling off the list might be a little difficult, but maybe you can give us sort of some highlights there of the number of countries or some of the main countries we have information for.
Yes, totally. So we have obviously the top six: Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Argentina. Which one am I forgetting? Of course.
Colombia.
Yeah, how could I forget the third largest, the fastest growing? But then we go into some of the smaller economies in Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala. We also have looking down south, Bolivia, Ecuador. So quite a relevant bunch of countries, and we have previous data on even more. So if you would like a customized update on countries, even like Nicaragua, we have data up to last year, which we could do a customized report and update those numbers specifically for your needs.
Right. And I think also I'm going to share this real quick in the group chat, just so just make sure they have your name and email address in case they want to find out more about this, because then you can just sort of get a deeper sense of what the e-commerce data library offers. I think one thing too, we mentioned earlier, but I think it's important to reiterate, is the customization component. Because we're a market research company, basically we can then find out what kind of, specific questions you may have about a market that's not in what we currently are offering, and provide that information to you as part of the deliverable for this kind of report, which is very different from the vast majority of reports that are out there. If you go to buy a report off the shelf, what you get is what you get. You can't have anything else. That's it. And the other advantage is that the PCMI license, there is no license. So if you buy this data on a particular country or various countries, you can share with as many people as you want within your company. It's not like other reports where you buy a single user license and then or a 5-user license and it costs you more money to get to more people in your company. With this, the access is pretty free. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's get back to some of these other questions. We have one from Adriana, and she's asking us, do you anticipate international e-commerce merchants growing in Latin America? What is the current footprint of merchants such as Alibaba, Amazon, etc.?
I can take that. I think we foresee a growth on international merchants. I think from the names you mentioned here, I think they all have presence here, either domestically through local entities or operating with cross-border providers. But Latin America, it is a big market. So we have seen that for the past 10, 15 years. And we will continue seeing that as any big merchant expanding globally will consider Latin America as a destination as well. So I think we see a lot of strong local names, local and regional names, but we also see a lot of the international names.
There's a related question from Carlos there, Cesar, and he's asking about Amazon specifically, what their competitive position is in the region and its place in cross-border development. What would be your take on that based on your observations?
Well, I think they're not small in Brazil. I think they are making huge investments in Brazil. They have a sizable operation in Brazil. They operate domestically and cross-border in Brazil. In a few other markets, they only operate cross-border. So I think they have been investing a lot. They have been growing a lot. It is a tough market. The marketplace, it is a tough market between the local champions and the international platforms. But if there is someone who has the funding and the expertise to succeed on that, I think it's Amazon. So
I really want to highlight, Cesar, sorry to interrupt, but I do want to highlight like the growth that they have had in Mexico and really serving the consumers, and even just going through Mexico City, seeing some of the ads, we do see their presence expanding and markets really gaining a foothold.
Yeah, and just remember that Amazon it's not just the marketplace, right? You have Prime, you have now they have just launched credit cards in Brazil as a co-branded with a local bank. So I think they are expanding very quickly with marketplace services, but also financial services as well.
And I think actually Amazon really exemplifies this marketplaces driving platforms driving e-commerce growth, because it spills over, like you said, into these, but also streaming with Prime Video that's really gaining popularity.
Yeah, and to your point, Andreas, I think which I thought was a very interesting data about that slide. Customer acquisition has become, and Abel is here to witness that, I guess. Online client acquisition has become very, very expensive after the pandemic. So everyone that runs like advertising, online ads, those like keywords, they have exploded. So a good way for those companies to expand the outreach and to increase the sales funnel and keep bringing new clients, it is indeed to expand the product offering, right? So if Mercado Libre, which was originally a marketplace, now has a financial services arm, which is Mercado Pago, and they have like Mercado Ads, and they have all those different product lines. Other than increasing the monetization for these products, it's also serving as a sales funnel to attract new clients, and some of them much cheaper than what they would acquire online.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's a very good point. So we have a more specific question related to payments that comes from Ernesto. So he's asking us, what is our analysis in terms of e-commerce in Latin America with the increase in the use of Bitcoin in e-commerce and the use of cryptocurrencies? I'm not sure how prevalent that is at this point, so it would be good to clarify that, I would expect.
So personal opinion here, I think it's cryptocurrency as like buying and selling cryptocurrency, it has exploded through local, regional, and global brokers, through like different platforms. You have, I think, especially in Brazil, almost all the digital wallets and digital banks offering a way for you to buy and sell cryptocurrency. As a payment method, we know that it's something that it's growing, but I personally haven't seen that. I haven't seen that growth in like, especially the large merchants. I haven't seen anything like that.
The only example I could really think of, like a large merchant accepting it, would be in Mexico, but even then it represents an insignificant volume.
Right. It's just not common in terms of the actual merchants themselves accepting it, although it's much more common for people to trade with each other, is essentially what you're saying, which makes sense. It seems like when we looked at the payment method slide, it's really focused on fairly conventional methods that we've all seen before, like buy now, pay later and credit cards and things of that nature, with the exception of something new like Pix, which is really taking the market by storm, at least in Brazil, which is a great way to democratize payments, I think, and it's probably part of why Brazil e-commerce has grown so much recently. In any event, there's another question that's related to regulation. It comes from Luke, and he's asking if do we see regulation across the region impacting e-commerce growth over the next 5 years?
Awesome. So regulation definitely does impact e-commerce, especially tax in terms of taxes. We have seen a string of um, taxes being put in place, like even in economies like the Bahamas over digital services, which we go into the extended blueprint report. And that will obviously hinder the growth of the sale of digital services. So yes, I would refer to our extended blueprint report that really dives into regulation to a certain extent there.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead. No, finish.
no, I was gonna address a previous comment that Abel made that relates to another question I see in the chat. So please finish on regulation.
No, I was just gonna say that a regulation is a very broad topic. That it can go from regulation to taxes to it can be a very broad topic. But what I see is that you know, like by now it's very hard to see borders. So you have, you know, countries are consumers are having access to products and services and digital goods offer across the globe. And it might the regulation might have an impact trying to level set especially taxes among those borders, right? So if there is a crypto provider or if there's a betting provider based out of Eastern Europe, selling things selling things into the region, not collecting taxes into the region, at some point you are not setting the level field between the local and regional and global players. So we have seen that, especially with the marketplaces. You know, the marketplaces in Brazil will begin to be taxed. So I think that happens kind of like to level set the local industry, the national industry, and also the cross-border. It is something that it's happening in the US as well. So I think few things the regulation will push e-commerce in few instances to boost volume and to keep growing and becoming more accessible. But we will also try to level field between the domestic and the international merchants.
I think your comment there on Brazil is very interesting, that tax situation looming over those $50. Okay, so what the comment I was going to make earlier and is going to address this question on did the growth of BMPL slow down with higher interest rates and what is the prospect for the future? And to begin answering that question, I'm going to call back something that Abel had mentioned. And so he had said like traditional payment methods, so including cards and BNPL. And so at first glance, that's like a shocking statement because BNPL is so new, supposedly. However, in the region, something that we're really seeing is BMPL is a digitization of a previous practice that has been done for decades, especially looking at merchant credit in Mexico, for example, like with Grupo Salinas and Electra and Copel. We're seeing these credit solutions have been around for like 70 or 80 years, financing consumer purchases and making up to 50% of their volume. So buy now, pay later takes many different forms. So this first and very foremost one is merchant credit. That's really making an impact. If we look at Brazil, there's Casas Bahia and Magalu, who all offer forms of non-card credit. But then we can also take BNPL in the more literal sense of BNPL specific fintechs. So we see Quesky ramping up in Mexico. And we see platforms, travel platforms like Despegar have a buy now, pay later fintech component or subsidiary coin. So who have experienced a slowdown because of the higher interest rates, but we don't see this going away. I think that buy now, pay later in the region, specifically in this region, presents a opportunity, especially as data becomes better and more available and better lending can be done. So I don't think that non-card credit is going anywhere. And I like the term non-card credit better than buy now, pay later because it encapsulates more of this. And even looking at card credit, so interest-free installments are really taking storm, but debit card purchases that can then be transformed into installments. We see this in markets like Argentina with Uala and Brubank, really just making sense for the market with high interest, high inflation, I mean. So I think that non-card credit is here to stay.
My only comment is that I would be more worried about default rates than high interest rates. I think what can drive BMPL growth in the region, it's actually lower default rates than higher interest rate.
Awesome point. That is the hindrance.
All right. Well, I think we're pretty much down to our final question from Lucas. And this question is focused on, it's just a raw data question, I would say. It looks to me basically asking, do we have an idea of how many transactions are taking place in the region? How many times customers buy online in a year? And I think we can give a rough answer to that, no?
So we could give a rough answer that would be considered in like a customizable data set or customizable report, because we do have internal data on average tickets for the verticals. So that's a great question to follow up on. Thank you for asking.
All right. So in the chat, you can see Andreas's information. And in fact, if you can also see it here now that we're pretty much coming to the end of the webinar itself. If you wanted to reach out for further questions like that, I think you probably would be able to get at least some idea and some more elaboration on some of your points that you're curious about. So I think this pretty much wraps us up for now. We want to thank you all for having joined us and hope that you can join us for future webinars. For PCMI, of course, we're going to be focused not only on Latin America, but also on global payments. So you very well may see some invitations to other webinars focused on other markets or on other aspects of markets around the world beyond just Latin America. In any event, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day.